The lack of POC representation and blatant racism that we see in the anime community is absolutely not a new phenomenon. But every so often I find it's a discussion that gets resurfaced when things get taken to the extreme, as we've seen recently with the tragic and unnecessary loss of the black non-binary cosplayer Ash, or when certain creators like Joey the Anime Man are completely unaware of their privilege. So welcome to Brown Girl Tea with Pri, where we discuss topics from a brown girl perspective. And today, if you're curious, I'm having a caramel hojicha, which is it is amazing. So grab your beverage of choice and let's get started by talking about why this is a problem in the community and why I think this keeps happening. So many of these issues related to race and representation in the anime community can be tied back to the aesthetics of anime. Chun Park, an academic, wrote this really insightful article, and in it they discuss whether Japanese anime characters appearing as white or presenting as white is actually just something that is projected onto it from Western culture. And to support this claim, they make two really insightful points that I think are worth discussing. The first one is that when you compare the most traditional styles of Western art and anime, most of the time the features are incredibly similar. And secondly, that when characters who are not Japanese or white in this case appear on screen, for example those from Northeast Asian descent, or just those who have any non-white features, there's a clear hierarchy in how they're portrayed. More often than not, they're seen as lesser than those whitewashed or more Japanese characters. And as I've seen online, the argument against that is that Japanese people probably don't view these characters as white, they probably view them as inherently Japanese. But Park argues that this Japanese perception of anime characters as being intrinsically Japanese is a collective defense mechanism to the potential accusation of racism and whitewashing against anime. Any smart Japanese person would know that the whitewashing of Japanese anime characters must be denied for anime to become accepted into the global market, which the West currently dominates. And what then happens in Western anime spaces is that this whitewashing turns into faux objectivity. So what I mean by that is when you then hear people talking about BIPOC cosplayers not being accurate to the source material, or they aren't doing the cosplay right or correctly just because of the color of their skin. So then because of this cultural misinterpretation and whitewashing, whiteness is then seen as the pinnacle for what that character would look like if you took it out of that fictional space and put it into the real world. And to use a disgusting modern day reference for this, Annie, the ex-grok bot, whatever the fuck she is, she's marketed as an antidote specifically to woke culture. And if we're looking at those corners of the anime community where people like this live, therefore I think you can look at her as what the pinnacle of that community want. They want the waifu coded, light-skinned as possible aesthetics to project onto. And you could argue that she functions as a case study to allow people to enjoy these cultural aesthetics without having to think about anything related to the real world. And that, I think, is the core of the representation problem and where it all starts from, because anime isn't politically neutral, but it gives people this stylized aesthetic to hide behind and to then use as a measure of projected whiteness onto people like us. So I think another part of this discussion that we don't often talk about is actually the emotional impact on BIPOC fans. And that might seem kind of obvious when there's a lot of discussion in the air right now, particularly around Ash's tragic passing. I think we just hear that it's bad, and then unfortunately we don't see these things until they're too late. So I'm gonna attempt to articulate this issue using my own personal experiences as well. So I remember cosplaying at my first ever Comic Con when I was 13, and I immediately remember having the thought that I had already internalized that I did not look like any of the characters that I had seen on screen in any of the animes that I had watched. For context, I am a shoujo girly, and obviously, yeah, none of them are looking like this. And so when I actually really wanted to cosplay a shoujo girly, I decided to cosplay Nier from Death Note, because I was like, he is closest to my skin color, and I will feel better knowing that I am being accurate. And interestingly enough, I have these conversations so often with one of my other friends who is mixed race, and I feel like oftentimes when you're brown, you're almost not even considered to be part of those conversations. And I think if you're a person of color more generally in the anime community, you can often feel gaslit by this weaponized accuracy. And it doesn't even come from white people in the community. As I've said, it can come internally. And that's where I feel like creators like Joey the Anime Man come into this conversation as well, because it's just playing into this othering narrative that one set of fans is better than the other. So even if to him it's not that deep when he calls people anime tourists, or refuses to acknowledge that one of the biggest animes in the world that is clearly political is political, as a person of color, you're then like, oh, okay, because your existence within that fandom, whether you like it or not, and your existence as a person of colour, as we all know, is political by nature, and that's something that we don't get to choose. And if you don't know, the cosplayer Ash unfortunately decided to unalive themselves because they were receiving so much racist hate online from their cosplays simply because they were black, which is so horrible to say out loud. But on the Reddit post discussing their passing, someone actually mentioned something that shocked me. They said, racism is a massive problem with the larger cosplay community as a whole though. We have a convention near me called Colossal Con. A group was going to do a panel called Cosplaying While Black to discuss microaggressions and how to handle being a cosplayer of colour in a predominantly white community. The whole panel got scrapped with the anime convention organisers basically saying it was because the topic was too serious and that this was a party convention. And that is essentially what it's like to be a person of colour in this space. Because even when, for example, in the case of Ash, you're trying to carve out that niche for yourself, you're trying to make that space for yourself, or in the case of these people who wanted to have that panel, you either end up being told that you can't do it because there isn't a space for it, even though you're trying to make the space, which is the terrible contradiction, or you try and make that space and then you're just encountered with so much resistance and hate that you're then like, okay, why am I even doing this? And the other level to this that I feel like not many people talk about is that even if you have supportive POC in the comments, they might have been conditioned to the point where they feel like their voices aren't as important. So then they might not want to comment because they might not only be scared of getting abused themselves, but they also just haven't been told that their voices are as important. Now, if you're an intelligent person watching this, which I'm sure you are, we already know where to go from here, right? We already know what we want. We want good representation. We want more POC representation. We want people to not be racist. So I want to talk about some examples where representation has actually been done well as an antidote to all of this. Even though I have not seen this anime, I came across this character called Mika from Licorice Recoil, who is a black father figure and also is gay. Maybe I shouldn't say it like that in the context of this video. We need some lightheartedness, okay? And in this video, the creator talks about why he is a great form of representation, diving deep into his character backstory. But I feel like this comment articulates it best, where they say he's a detailed, genuine, and likable character. It's the first step towards proper representation. And that is obviously what we need more of. Carol and Tuesday, I felt like that's popped up recently, is also a really great example of representation, even though I also didn't watch the full thing. And I think it's important to remember that point. We're taking these steps towards representation, right? And whilst we shouldn't accept that anime and the anime community are just like this and we're only ever gonna get these morsels and little crumbs of representation, it's also really important to remember that this whole discussion, the aesthetics of anime and representation are all on a sliding scale. And an interesting case study for this that I watched recently, right, is an anime called Betrothed to My Sister's Ex, which, if you haven't watched it, oh, it was so good. Now, the main love interest in that is actually a brown man and a brown prince. And his homeland is essentially this mishmash of like oriental views of brown people, you know what I mean? He's got a few different elements mixed together. It's like Romanian, maybe a little bit of Turkish backgrounds, a little bit of sort of Indian backgrounds as well. But it's not really grounded in any real world representation. So normally, that means you put it on this end of the spectrum, right, where it's bad. But because he was such a detailed and loving and well portrayed character, the more I watched this anime, the more I was like, absolutely, we need more characters like this. And especially as someone who has never, ever seen brown men well represented in anime, I literally could only think of two examples, right? Which was the prince from Black Butler which was somewhat grounded in historical context, and let's be real, was boring and annoying as fuck. And then the other one that I found as an example was a character called Krishna Ramesh, which I was like, come on, could you literally, this is a JK Rowling level name from some kind of tennis anime, and he only came into the series in like chapter 47 of the manga. I'm like, come on now. Where are the main characters at? And as much as I dislike the idea that we need to separate ourselves as fans in order to get like basic safety and like joy and belonging, it is still important to remember that for every one racist idiot fan, there are hundreds of BIPOC fans in the wings who are either ready to boo them off or who will just slide into your DMs with a supportive compliment if they don't have the energy to get down in the comments. And just because we're not represented and just because we're not on screen doesn't mean that we don't exist. And my hope is that actually as anime becomes more global, becomes more quote unquote normalized in society, the anime tourists that some creators don't like will actually be the people who force the community to become more accepting and push it towards actually helping us gain some better representation. I feel like it's the equivalent of like someone new coming to a house and looking around and being like, is this how you live? We need to do better. Please remember that in the midst of all of this, your voice truly does matter. And if you're feeling unsafe or if you're feeling like it's not and you're not in a good place, I'll leave some links in the description below because we don't need the loss of any more wonderful people in this world unnecessarily. And we're all just gonna ride the wave of taking small steps towards better representation where we can. Now, if you want a stupid, funny palette cleanser after all that, I think you'd like my video where I tier rank different animes, or if you're feeling empowered to maybe overcome some of that internalized racism, be more visible, you can watch this video here where I talk about how I managed to do that and perform on a stage in front of thousands of people at one of London's biggest venues, and also get my boobs out at Comic-Con. Very much on the same level. And as always, I hope you're having as lovely as a day as you can be, and I will see you over there in the next video.